Hi, everyone. Thank you for that wonderful introduction. Thank you for having us. Thank you for being here. You know that I'm a writer because I have a tote bag and a clipboard, stepping things up a little bit. So I wanted to start. I'm Courtney, by the way. And I was hoping that we could begin with a show of hands, if you feel comfortable. Who here considers themselves a writer? Who here feels awkward about identifying as a writer? Okay. So we're going to get into some bunch of stuff today, but I wanted to kick things off by explaining why I wrote this book. I always wanted to be a writer from a young age. I had a lot of supportive teachers growing up, but I didn't major in English. I went to college, but I didn't major in English, and I don't have an MFA. I never pursued one. I live in a really rural area. Most of my, the past decade I spent in the Berkshires, in a log cabin. I had to build my literary community from the ground up. But when things finally started happening for me, they really started happening. I got a great book deal at Simon & Schuster, a wonderful editor. My first two books were with what we call the Big Five, the big publishing houses. And then I pivoted and I put out my third and fourth book with independent presses. And it was through publishing these different books with different houses, different editors, vastly different advances, touring for them or not, that I started to realize something that I think I had realized from the get-go, but was in a better position to write about it, which is that there's amazing resources in our country, especially for sure in Boston. Amy cited quite a few of them in the beginning, Grub Street, that help writers learn how to write better, how to write so good that they eventually get a book deal. There's great places to go for conferences and whatnot, but there's like nothing, especially in terms of books or guidebooks, that help prepare you for the success of actually getting a book deal and for navigating what life is like as a published author when regardless of the level at which you're publishing, whether you're with a micro press, you have a chapbook, or you're with one of the big guys and you got one of these multi-figure deals, everyone goes through the same experience of having something that was deeply, deeply private for a long time become public in a way that no one has prepared you for. You might think that you're prepared to get a positive review, a negative review, but no one really comes along and says, hey, you very well might get a 1-star Amazon review from a stranger who doesn't like the turtleneck that you're wearing in your author photo. And, like we're laughing, but I wanted to create a guide that helped writers navigate the initial years when they're just starting to take their writing seriously through getting an agent, if you decide to pursue that path, which is, I think, a wise and necessary one, through getting an editor and a book deal, and then more or less 2 years after that book has come out, when you're trying to get yourself together to write another one, or perhaps you had a 2-book deal and you were contractually obligated to get that book in. And I wanted to reflect an experience that for me went from exciting and positive to petty and embarrassing and back up in the space of minutes, really. It's a funny journey that all of us are on. And so what I did in the book is I tried to write the most exhaustive guidebook possible. There's questions about self-publishing. Can I call myself a writer if I'm not making money from my writing yet? There's a massive section on money, because money is a taboo thing that no one talks about. They don't tell you how to make a living as a writer, and you need to hear that. We get into things like, when Trump happens to you, what if I die before my book comes out? The world is going to want a novel, but you do not have to give it one. I tried to write an exhaustive book. I tried to write an informed book that represented viewpoints, backgrounds, experiences that aren't my own, that will never be my own, which means that I reached out to a lot of other people, interviewed lots of wonderful people, and I was hoping to replicate that experience tonight by being joined by these eminent professionals. So what we're going to do is I have a handful of questions that I wanted to ask our panel, and then we're going to open it up to the room and hopefully have a candid, fun, inspiring, but not sugar-coated discussion, because I'm a big believer that it hurts more in the long run to have been lied to about this industry and how hard it is. I've lost my, I can no longer write sentences in my, it's better to just be told the truth from the get-go and then arrange your life around that truth and learn how to do it anyway than to be lied to. It's not very positive language that I'm using. But anyway, let's get into this. So the first question I wanted to address, because I think a lot of people have this question, it's about agents. So I think all of us go to a lot of conferences. We talk to a lot of people who are starting out in their writing careers or just starting to take themselves seriously, which congratulations, honestly, because whether it's investing in the ticket for tonight or you have sent in an application for a summer writers conference, something you need to do is to start taking your own writing seriously and to invest money in it if you want other people to. I do believe that. So lots of people say, how do I get an agent? How do I get an agent? I myself am on my third agent. A lot of people I interviewed are on their second, third, fourth, fifth, and I think what that reveals is that we don't all sign with the right person right away. Now, most writers, by the time they're ready for an agent, they've had so much rejection come their way that the very second you get something positive in your inbox, that someone wants to work with you, there's not really any fiber in your being at that point that says, hey, now, let's slow down with that offer of collaboration. You know, I need to get to know you. No, we say yes to the dress. We're so excited. So how does an emerging writer protect themselves and make sure that they're signing with the right agent? Over to you. All of you.
Okay. So Esmond is my agent, and he's stuck with me. So, I just bring him along everywhere, and he comes. So we met at the Breadloaf Writers Conference when I was in my mid-20s.
Did you pitch to him at that?
I did, and I was
it can happen.
Was terrible because I was in my mid-20s, and I ran into the office, and I'm like, I want to meet with more agents than you're even letting me meet with. So I just was really forceful, and I also said something really terrible to Esmond. I think I said something like, I pitched my book as in, Anita Shreve, who we just lost. Wonderful writer, beautiful writer, and her beautiful book, Weight of Water. And I think I said to Esmond, it's like Weight of Water, but more literary.
Ooh,
Like, who is this person? Like, what a snob, what a horrible person. And yet, he still was interested. I don't know why. And then he worked with me for a very long time, back and forth with a lot of revisions before we actually had a book to put out. And then when we did send a book out, we only sent it on the first round. And I pulled it, I think, before we even got answers from editors because I thought, this book is not any good. Don't sell it. And then I worked on another book with him. Anyway, so Esmond has been great because he's been with me for a very long time. And when I published my first book and I went to the Center for Fiction, I got a prize there, and he came to all the big parties, and you're at all these big parties, and Esmond was kind of my date, which was kind of was great because my boyfriend at the time couldn't be there, and Esmond he knows everyone, and he's charming, and I'm from Iowa, and I don't understand how to handle these sorts of events. And sorry if you're also from Iowa, but he was on my arm, and he said to me, he said, "Michelle, all the most important people in businessing are in the publishing business are here." And I said, "Oh my God, don't tell me that." But he has stuck with me, and it's been really wonderful. You do have to have an agent that you can communicate with. So I have been able to. I hope I don't bother him too much, but if I'm worried about something or I'm really bothered by something, I can get Esmond on the phone and he'll talk me through it. He's stuck by me. He's passionate about my work. So you do want someone that has the same communication style as you have. You want someone that loves your work, absolutely loves your work, is really excited about your work. And you certainly never pay an agent, okay? You don't pay them to read your work. They should be making the money off of the commission. So if anyone's asking for money up front, then you're in trouble. So Breadloaf Writers Conference is a good place to meet agents. The Grub Street Museum and Marketplace Conference that takes place in early April is much cheaper. And you can meet a lot of agents and editors at that conference. If you can have a face-to-face meeting with them, because would Esmond, if I had been that uppity in a letter to Esmond, I don't think he would have signed me. If you can meet face-to-face with someone, that's great, but some people don't have those resources. But just keep trying. One of our incubator students, Susan Bernhard, came out with a novel last year called Winterloon. It was a huge hit, but it took her 101 queries in order to get an agent. And she almost quit at 100. And she says, "You know what? I'm going to just send out one more query, and I heard that this particular agent gets back to you right away, and he just smacks you down. If he doesn't like it, he just smacks you down right away, and that's what I want. I want to be smacked down, and then I'll stop writing." And he took it. And he's
101. That takes a level of fortitude and perseverance.
Yeah.
And that's basically. So I banged down the doors. I wanted to be a writer.
Are you still with 12. Your first? Your number one?
No.
Okay.
So I graduated from college, and I locked myself in an apartment very close to here, and I wrote 9 novels in 9 months. And then I started to send them to every publisher and agent in New York, and I received 190 rejection slips, and I had them taped to my walls like a serial killer. Eventually, an editor took pity on me and said, "Oh, you're writing a lot of garbage, but go read John Grisham and come back in a year." And so I read Grisham and Crichton and whatever. And so then I wrote a medical thriller and again hit every agent and publisher and found out that John Grisham's agent was a guy who had been born in Boston. So I wrote a query letter to him basically saying, "You're from Boston, I'm in Boston, will you read my manuscript?" He said yes, and he became my first agent. Then when I was rejected for my next 3 books with him, and then he died. But as a young, struggling writer, I signed anything put in front of me. So I was contracted to a dead agent who would not let me go, his estate. So I then had another book idea, and I wrote a book, and my dead agent couldn't take it anywhere. So I found another agent and paid double commission and sold that book and was able to escape that agency. And that second agent has been my book agent. No, sorry, that was not my... That agent was my book agent for 3 books. And then I had the Facebook story and went to another agent with that story, who has been my agent since the Facebook story. My Hollywood agent became a big part of my life at around the time of 21 and has been my agent. That's my longest running agent. So my agent on the Hollywood side has been my agent for, 15 years, almost 20 years. And my book agent's been my agent for probably 10 years. But basically, it was the rejection was my route. So,
I mean, what I'm hearing is, some of us have had careers that, well, especially, perhaps only you, a lot of expansiveness and success in other territories. So, again, how do we know, and I'm hoping that Esmond can weigh in here, how do we know, we're so excited, we signed with the first person, but, they're signing us for this most times, right, for this manuscripts that they've read and hopefully fallen in love with. But what I realized in my journey with my different agents is that ultimately what I really needed was a business partner who saw beyond that first manuscripts, saw the potential arc of my career, and was also willing to pivot with me, because I did pivot. I started to do projects that were a little less commercial, funkier, harder to sell. They weren't totally wildly different in terms of genre, but I've been telling people to not forget that when an agent wants to work with you, they're asking to be your employee. You know, and it won't feel like that because it's so exciting to have an agent who wants to work with you, but they are going to be taking 15%. You're allowed to ask them a couple questions about their working style. Michelle was saying it's important to communicate. It's also essential to make sure that they like to communicate in the ways that you like to communicate. I had to part ways with someone because they would answer my emails once every 2 weeks at 3 a.m. in a sort of stream. Right, it would be email after email after. So I'd get these, which fine, except I don't send rampant emails. But you know, if I'm sending 3 a week, it's nice to get a response when you've actually sent it, right? Or if you really like the phone, are you working with someone that likes to talk on the phone? If your first book is, I don't know, literary fiction with a little bit of romance. Is it possible that you might transition to erotica, thriller, another genre? And is your agent willing to go there? So, I mean, Esmond, what do you, when you are looking at a submission that's for the many different reasons got you thinking, gosh, I might be able to work with this person. You know, we're in a very competitive market. So are you just looking at that manuscript? Are you looking beyond to how you can help this person build a brand?
Well, first of all, I just have to say, you know, I've been trying to get Michelle to write erotica for decades, and now I finally feel I have the ammunition to persuade her to move headlong into the erotica
Historical
market.
erotica.
Yeah, historical erotica, absolutely. Well, I think you've all raised such really, really interesting issues, and just the first thing I wanted to say is I want to apologize on behalf of the publishing industry that it's so ridiculously difficult, and it does require you to, number one, be so persistent, and number two, just go through all this endless paperwork and looking through lists of people. I mean, frankly, it's a really big bore, and it's wonderful that you're willing to do it, but it's a pity that you have to do it. But I thought I would tell you a little bit about what it's like, you know, before I get to those questions, to be an agent. So I think, you know, and again, I'm going to make this colossal assumption that could be wrong, that other people are like me, and generalize, and it could be completely wrong. But I think that most agents who are working in fiction are really hungry for good fiction. But to get it, we have to open ourselves up to a massive number of people. So much as you are out there searching for a large number of people to contact, for us, we literally have hundreds of people sending us queries every week. And in my case, I read them. I'm at a point in my career where I could delegate it, but I don't like to because I miss things and it's just takes longer, it's not efficient. So I read them, and I request about 10 full-length manuscripts each month. And there are always things that there's at least some reason why I need to consider them.
This is
seriously.
out of about 400, 500.
I get more than 100 queries every week on average, and sometimes much more. But so it's probably about 10 full-length, 7 to 8 to 10 full-length manuscripts a month, because then I also have to factor in all the manuscripts I read by clients I'm working with and different drafts of things. And when I make a commitment to work on something, I will often work heavily on the novel several times, do full-length edits. So for me, I have to be just crazy about it and passionate about it. I have to absolutely love it and also get that little itch at the back of my brain where I see its commercial potential. If either of those aren't there, I'm probably going to say no. And just to be very clear, for commercial potential, I don't mean it has to be something very commercial. I mean, I have to get a sense of oh, I think this place would buy this, or this editor I know would love this. And if either of those things are missing, that doesn't mean I just completely say no. I might refer to a colleague, or I might think, this is something that might work for you, and all of that. But it is the most exciting thing in the world is finding something good that's come out of nowhere. It's so exciting. It's rare. And for me, I wear blinkers like everybody else. I don't walk into the bookstore and think, all these books are equally wonderful. I think, oh my God, I can't imagine who buys that person's books. And wow, that best-selling novel is so boring. It's like sleeping pills to me. And here's this totally obscure novel I think should be a #1 bestseller that I'm the only person who bought. So I have my own taste in different things, and there's only a tiny little sliver of the market that I can really see. I think one really interesting thing you brought up, though, is writers who change their genre and who it's a particular type of talent to be able to write in very different styles, very different genres, to have one of those careers when you read the biography of the writer where it's almost like they get bored, so now they write this, and it's something completely different. That is hard for both agents, for authors looking for an agent, and for publishers and editors, because you really need to find the right person who can follow you into all those areas and do an equally good job in them. So it is just hard.
Yeah, and before we move on to the next question, I want to add something to something that you said, which I talk quite a bit about in the book. These days, if you are getting close to working with an agent, do find out whether or not they work as a developmental editor, which Esmond is saying he does a little bit. When he's working on a client's project that they're getting ready to shop or to send out to editors, he's saying that he'll help them revise it and get it tight enough that hopefully there's not a lot of reasons why someone could turn it down. That's a very valuable added skill that not all agents provide, and it's one that I would say will give you a massive leg up. Sounds like I'm just imagining a massive leg, but will give you such an advantage because acquiring editors these days at publishing houses, they have so little time left to actually edit. They're in meetings all day long. So if you go out to editors with a manuscript that's already tightly edited, and also you're being taught by your own agent how to edit, I find that very valuable. My third agent works with me like that. So there's some people out there who don't they don't really want to be edited until they have a book deal. I don't think that attitude will take you very far in life. But if you do not want an agent that is going to edit you and make you go through 27 drafts before you actually sell your book, you want to make sure that you've got an agent who's just going to go right to the submission. So that's something to check on. So second question, I'd love to talk about mistakes. If we all think back to our sort of first publishing experiences, and then Esmond, in your case, when perhaps it was your first sale or when you're just starting out, what do we wish we knew then that we know now? I'll start. When I was querying, trying to get an agent, I was just sending out these blind emails from my Hotmail account. This was in the early aughts. I wrote to industry tycoon Binky Urban, sort of a legendary agent, with the subject line, "This book will change your life." Now she wrote back almost right away, so perhaps that was a good thing. But she said that it wasn't gonna change her life, but my email rather did. So that was sort of a no-no. What about all of you?
All right. One big mistake was on the money side. By the age of 28, I was $2 million in debt with an IRS agent who knew me by name and would show up at my apartment demanding some sort of payment. I lived off of multiple credit cards. Used to get those checks from the credit card companies, which you should never use. And I would use those checks to pay my rent. There's
a lot of notes.
I had. So what happened was, sold my first book when I was about 25, and got a lot of money for it. I signed a multiple book deal for a lot more money, and then decided I was going to spend it all, thinking that my career was going to be a skyrocket. Because nobody tells you when you're publishing checks, maybe it's in your book, that they don't take anything out of it.
We have a whole section called financial planning.
Right, and that you shouldn't spend it all. Unfortunately, nobody read any of those books. So the book would come out and sell 2 copies to my parents. And yet I kept being paid these massive advances. And so I just, was like the crazy sports star or whatever who has these used checks. So I spent every penny I had, and in my late 20s, my books were all failing. I had a huge debt that I could never pay off. And so I had a stack of business school applications under my bed because I thought the only way I'm ever going to pay my way out of this debt is to go to business school and get a real job. Luckily, that's when I met the MIT blackjack team, started playing blackjack with them, and turned it into the book Bring It Down the House, which changed everything. Had that not happened, I wouldn't be sitting here today. I would be working on Wall Street trying to pay off this massive debt. So the biggest mistake I made as a young author, I think, was not to buy an apartment in the South End, but instead spend, because this was the 90s, think about that. The South End was, you could get everything for cheap. So anyways, I think you have to read the chapter on money very carefully, because we get paid strangely in this business. When you're doing really, really well, pay heed to the fact that you won't always be doing really, really well. And lightning can strike again, but you can't count on it. So you need to be smart with how you spend your money.
But before we move on to your answers, I want to follow up on that. I want to argue that it's actually one of the greatest disservices that teachers in MFA programs are doing to young students is allowing them to believe that you can make money as a creative writer. You should not go into this industry believing that, or really even hoping that. If that happens for you, it's fantastic. It could be ephemeral. Like Ben is saying, you can have a hit debut and then they don't even want to acquire your second book. And I spell it out in the book, but you do want to surround yourself with people who will speak to you frankly about finances, who will explain to you that a lot of advances are paid in 3 or 4 payments over 2 years. And so if you're getting a modest advance, you could be getting checks that you can't even cover a credit card bill with. And you might get money that looks like life-changing money, but when your agent takes 15%, and this is why you need an agent that's worth the 15%, and then the IRS takes the 20%, and then it's divided over all these 2 years, you have to have some sort of backup income stream. Make sure you have some other skills that you can fall back on for the times where your writing is not bringing in money. So if you would like to answer mistakes, what do you wish you'd know now when you were first publishing or publishing other people?
I think I've made so many mistakes that they're kind of a blur of blackness, but I am a feedback junkie, and you do want to be very careful when you publish, because I would read all the reviews, and I'd read Goodreads, and I'd read everything. And you need to be very, very careful. And so my first book, I had a lot of very good reviews at the beginning. And then I got my New York Times review. And I don't actually think the writer read past page 12. And it was she basically said, well, she should have written a different book. And it was pretty scathing. It was pretty bad. And I was supposed to have a big reading that night in Iowa City. And so Iowa City has Perry Light's bookstore. It's one of the major bookstores in the country. And so I'm sitting in my car in the parking garage in Iowa City. I called my editor. I think I called poor Esmond. I hadn't been sleeping very well because I'd been on tour for about 2 weeks. So I was kind of sobbing, which... and I just was like, I can't go to my reading tonight. And my brother was trying to buy extra copies of the review, because he's like, it's so exciting that you got. And I'm like, I just wanted to burn them. I'm like, how dare you? It's so ridiculous. It's so ridiculous.
It's not ridiculous.
Well, it is and it isn't. I mean, if you can kind of turn these things into, Like now it's funny. So my mother and all her friends, because my mother came and she said, my mother lives in Iowa and all her friends, and she's like, well, no one actually reads the New York Times. And I'm like, okay, yeah. And then all her friends looked up the writer of said review. And they all started gossiping about it. And basically they said, she just doesn't really look like a very happy person.
Yeah.
So it came.
You did the Midwestern accent.
Now I'm like feeling sorry for the reviewer. And then I also had a Goodreads review in which someone quoted my sentences from the book and said how terrible my sentences were. Like, oh my God, my sentences were so terrible. And she quoted my sentences from the book. They weren't my sentences. That was a hard one. And I was like, don't respond, because you really should not, you really need not to respond. You really need to just step away. And so if you're getting that stuff, try not to be defensive, try to learn a little about it. In my second book, I had someone that thought I misrepresented German Americans around World War I. I actually entered a kind of nice dialogue with her. That was great. So just try to not, it's not all roses. When you publish a book, you're gonna get feedback that's great. And hello to the reality. You're entering the real world here. You're putting your stuff out there, and not everyone's gonna think that you're a genius. Far from it. And some people are going to be jealous of the fact that you even got a book published. So I guess just to try to, learn from any of those if you can, and then just step back and not pay attention to them if you can. It can be really hurtful, but talk to your friends, make a joke about it. The fact that I was getting published at all was great. The fact that I got a New York Times review at all was great. So that's just something to...
My first New York Times review, the first line was, "This is a bad book." So it was hard to sugarcoat that line, but there'll be bad reviews, there'll be good reviews. Yeah. It'll go back and forth for years and years. So hopefully, if you get your book published, you should enjoy the bad reviews as much as the good reviews.
Yes, keep your sense of humor.
Yeah, it's.
Esmond, have you made any mistakes?
Oh, I've made tons of mistakes, but I made some very embarrassing ones, sometimes with the collusion of my clients. I once sent a very, very important, very well-known editor of fiction a novel, and I had spoken to the writer. I fired the writer after this conversation, but I had spoken to the writer and gone over the list of people we were sending it to, and the editor called me and she said, "I don't think you know that he's my ex-husband. We were married, divorced 15 years ago, and we've never spoken since." So that was kind of embarrassing, make you want to hide right under the desk and but I don't know. I think that what everyone is saying, success is really fickle. The one thing I would say is really true is there are people who have big successes and it's not always repeated. So it is very important to have financial and life consistency and have, be enterprising and be thinking about other things you can do. And then I think you just need to be absolutely bloody-minded and persistent about getting your voice out there as much as possible, taking advantage of any opportunities to speak, to write, to be part of the conversation. And then the other thing that I think is really important is, firstly, I think just a step back, I don't think there really are big mistakes people can make, because if you're writing and producing literary work, that's just an amazing thing. That's a huge plus for the world. Even, I have a secret club of friends for whom I buy the worst possible books. We try to find the most awful self-published books every year. We also specialize in really bad poetry. And I have bought 10 copies on A Libris of the collected poems of Barbara Cartland, the British romance writer, and it's just a hilarious treat, I can tell you. But even producing that was a net plus for the world. So there aren't any mistakes. You're writing, you're contributing. But if you want to make money writing, you've got to listen to the market, and you've got to see what happens. You've got to follow trends and follow your audience. And that doesn't necessarily mean you're going to be producing #1 bestsellers. You need to find your niche, speak to them, and really develop communication with that audience.
To dovetail on that, I think people should remember to read above their station and also below, or what they think is below, because you can come out the gate with a big ego, but if you start reading work that you consider, I don't know, somehow beneath you, maybe it's a genre that you look down on, maybe it's a self-published author or something, you might not admit this out loud, but ultimately, or inevitably rather, you'll find some of the same mistakes you're making in your own work. And when you start reading something and going, oh God, what a ridiculous tangent. Can you believe that this romance writer is describing, 4 scenes in 4 pages of what the upholstery looks like. And then you get notes back from your agent or an outside reader who says, like, why are we hearing so much about this? When you expose yourself to, less polished writing, you become sort of unable to ignore your own blind spots. I have an article I wrote recently on electric literature called something like Podcasts That Hear Your Way to Better Writing, or something like that. And I talk about a deep, deep love I have for a podcast called My Dad Wrote a Porno. We got other. Okay, so this is what it sounds like. It's a son whose father, he discovered, was sitting in his garden shed and writing these pornographic novels. And he brought his 2 best friends on, and he reads a chapter every week out loud in beautiful, posh British accents, and his friends weigh in. And it's all great fun, but it also trains your ear to what bad writing and good writing is. And this is why I think it's important to do 2 things, regardless of whether you've published a lot, never, whatever. Get yourself to reading series and push yourself to go to series of, if you don't read or listen to a lot of poetry, go to poetry readings, push yourself beyond your own genre, and subscribe to literary magazines. But also, I think one of the best pieces of advice I have for people is to volunteer as a reader for literary magazines. You have tons in Boston, but of course they're all throughout the world and the country. And again, if you yourself are entering a period of submission, and I don't mean like an S&M thing, I mean you're going out on submission trying to get an agent or an editor, it's so important and useful that you put yourself in the position of a gatekeeper. And when you volunteer to read for, you don't need a lot of credentials because they're desperate for people, you start reading the slush pile. And when you are reading the slush pile, you will see, God, this person's just thinking in their head. They're standing still and thinking in their head. And then you'll go back to edit your own novel that's overlong, you now realize. And you'll realize that the entire first chapter is some angry person who's just drinking tea and thinking negative thoughts in their head. So expose yourself to writing that for some reason you think is beneath you, because everything can be a teaching tool. So my last question before we open it up to the audience is, I think we used to live in, I don't know if it's more innocent or simpler times, where you would, actually type up a query letter and put the first 3 chapters of your manuscript, maybe your whole manuscript, in an actual craft envelope and send it off to some address around the Fifth Avenue area in New York, and you'd wait, you'd have the self-addressed stamped envelope to come back, and you're hoping for a book deal. These days, the path towards a book deal, there's so many paths, right? You can do it that way. You have a manuscript, you try to get it represented, you work on it together, off you go. But these days, you could write an essay or have an op-ed that goes viral or gets a lot of eyes on it, and the agents come to you, the editors come to you. You write some article. I know that this was the case with, I'm going to forget the title of the book. A man who was a terrible banker and a banker, sorry, a man who was a terrible bank robber, not the same thing. Cherry. Okay, terrible bank robber. There was an article about what a bad bank robber this guy was and how he had to go to jail because all of the local bankers were like, dude, we know your mom, like, just stop. And an editor in New York read about this and reached this guy in jail and said, do you have the book in you? An editor from FSG. So, or maybe you're a celebrity and people are begging you to write a book. And then I know Ben has a really interesting way he goes about getting to his long form projects. So I was hoping we could close our panel portion of the evening by talking about the different ways to book deals these days. Maybe you want to start us off, Ben, because you have...
Well, I mean, my situation is a little unique, but at this point, and for a long time now, when I am going to do a story, I won't write a book unless I think it can be a movie or a television show. And I've actually been that way since, for a very long time, since 2002. And so what I do is usually people are pitching me stories, so finding me on Twitter and sending me a story idea or whatever. I meet with the people. If I like the story, I write a 14 to 15 page proposal, which is also a treatment. I sell the treatment as a movie or a television show, and then I sell it as a book, and then I write the book while the other project is being developed. And the reason I do this is because I think we're at a moment right now where people are devouring content more than they ever were, but not necessarily in book form. And that's a nice way of saying that the book has gone like this. And yet, being a content provider is more important now than it's ever been. So I look at a book as a platform to something bigger. Whether that bigger thing ever happens or not, I don't have all the control over, but I won't write the book unless I think it can be bigger and bigger and bigger. Now, I didn't start out this way. When I was a struggling writer, I did send the envelopes out and get rejection. That's how I broke in. But at this point now, I think you have to be more business-minded because of the environment we're in. I mean, the streamers and people are watching so much TV right now that's where everything is going, certainly in the money way. So any project you write, for me, I need to have eyes on where is it going to live beyond the book. And so that's how I approach it now.
And so each of my books, I think I was following a mystery of something I wanted to understand and wanted to learn. So it was a very different process. I do think a little bit about marketability, but that can also stop you and lead you to writing a very bad book. Because if you aren't really passionate about it, and if you aren't spending time, and if you're not have the patience, if you're just looking for that book deal and chasing after that, you're not going to be able to just sit with the book and really create a really good story. So find a story that you're passionate about. Find a story that you want to sit in. That's important to you, that's interesting to you, that you can get carried away with. Because if you're not able to find that passion in your work, why is anyone else going to be passionate about it, to buy it? No one is. And you also are going to need to be passionate about the subject when you talk about it to other people. So I started with smallest to mid-level publisher called Other Press. And if you start off with a slightly smaller publisher and you do very well, it can look very good to larger publishers, versus if you start off with a really big publisher and you don't do well. So I was able to move then to Grove Atlantic, and now I'm actually on submission now for my third book. So if you see me in the street and I look weird, that's something's happening. And we're trying to go to higher publishers with that book. But I've also had students that have published things through places like She Writes Press. I have a student that's published both graphic novels and her other novel through a micropress. I have had students that have gone on to self-publishing. Be careful with self-publishing. There's a lot of people out there in the self-publishing world that will take your money. A lot of them.
And a lot of editors that will not take work that has been previously self-published.
Right.
And something I tell people all the time is if you feel that your work has potential, the worst thing you can do is self-publish it. And I have self-published a short story collection. So, I know what I'm talking about. I think editors are, with very few exceptions, cannot take on work that has already been self-published. So if you feel that you need to self-publish because in your heart you're just dying to have the book object, then that's fine. But if you think that your rejection letters that you've been receiving are ill-informed and incorrect, and that's why you're self-publishing, you're better off investing in an outside manuscript consultant or taking your book to a summer workshop or something like that and learning to revise, okay, better than self-publishing.
Because I met a woman once, and she said, I said, oh, what was your first book? And she said, oh, it wasn't very good. I didn't care about writing a good book. I just wanted to publish a book so I could run seminars on how to publish a book. And I just sat there and my soul was burning. It was very difficult to hear. She really didn't care about producing something good. She just wanted to put herself to be able to tell other people how to, I guess, do the same thing.
Okay, so don't take that woman's class.
I don't know what she's doing. But there can be all levels, and there's so many really, really, really good small publishers today, and they're producing really good work. And particularly if you're a writer of color or more marginalized writer, it's still a very white industry at the top. They come out with the numbers, and it's a hugely problematic in the industry right now.
We're 80% white, I think.
Yeah, it's obscene. I think the smaller publishers are an easier way to kind of break in that way, and they do a really wonderful job. One of our students, Elizabeth Shelburne, came out with a novel in this fall. Yes, Liz, are you here, Elizabeth?
Congratulations!
Awesome. So her book came out with a very, very small publisher, but they said, we're gonna put your book number one, like it's gonna be our number one book this year. And Elizabeth was kind of concerned because she thought she was gonna get kind of the bigger deal, and she was a little worried, and she was a little less than excited. They have done so well with that book. I mean, part of it is because it's a great.
What's the name of the book?
Holding On to Nothing by Elizabeth Shelburne.
Good job.
A really good book. And that book has been everywhere, and they produced it beautifully. They have gotten it out. It's sold well, and so you can do really well with these people, and they just believe in publishing. They just believe in putting out something really good. So there's lots of options.
So we're at time for our panel portion. We're going to open it to Q&As really quickly, though, because I have written an advice book. I love giving advice, especially if you're a nonfiction writer. You'd be well advised while you're sorting out your manuscript, revising it, getting it right, getting it ready for an agent's eyes, to try to place personal essays and op-eds that flirt with the themes in your manuscript into, you could start off small, local papers, online magazines, maybe aim for some of the bigger places, so that will help your agent be able to sell your manuscripts. So let's open it up now. Hopefully people have questions. Okay, great. I think we have a microphone, right, that's going to be passed around. So let's start with you here.
Hi, thank you for a great presentation. I used to work in the publishing industry years ago as a marketing manager. And I think at least then, one of the big lies of publishing was that if you got your book published, the company would market it for you. And publishing has changed a great deal since then, but back then that was not the case unless the people in the division that was publishing your work thought it would be one of their great products.
Right.
My question for you is, you make a lot less money if you go with a publisher, if your book does sell well. So if you are someone who knows how to do marketing, what value added does a publisher bring? Yeah, that makes it worth your trying to get an agent and selling to a publisher
versus self-publishing.
Versus self-publishing, trying to sell on Amazon. I haven't done either thing. Right. I just want your take on what value added the publishing industry currently offers.
So if you're a writer and you want to write, self-publishing with the aim to actually sell some copies like in the thousands, and make some money, you will have no time to write. Yeah.
I should have added, I'm talking about nonfiction.
Okay. To me, in my personal experience and having interviewed self-published authors, that doesn't make a big difference. I mean, what publishers add, and of course it's true, there's lead titles at every publisher, whether you're with a small publisher, big publisher. The lead titles will get the most marketing support, they'll get the most energy, they'll get the most time. But publishers in America come with marketing groups. A lot of them, most of them now have publicists, they have social media managers, and most of them are going to be doing their level best for you. When you have a lead title, I've had lead titles with every book. I have been supplied with 2 publicists, right? I'm not paying for any of this. When you switch over to nonfiction, everything will come out of your pocket. So number one, you need to have some deep pockets in order to have some, or to attempt to have a level of success with self-publishing. You need to have an inordinate amount of time. I have a friend right now going through this. He used to be he's a famous celebrity photographer, so he thought he had a built-in audience. He thought he was like, why should I give this story to other publishers? Well, number one, the publishers didn't want it, but he also thought he could do better with it because of his celebrity contacts. And now he's in a depression. I'm not making light. He completely underestimated the amount of physical, butt in the seat hours that it would take to just be emailing. And he's gone everywhere. He's written his contacts at Yale, all the alumni clubs, all the places. And the problem with self-publishing is until you actually have a book out and have seen how hard it is to sell a copy of that book to people that come to your events, you have no idea how hard it is to sell books. So best case scenario, when you go with a traditional publisher, they're sending out emails. Someone's distributing it to you, because it's not just about getting the word out to friends and families and readers. You have to let the bookstores know, and then you have to let the press know, and the levels just go on and on and on. And I think self-publishing is great when you're in like the situation I was in. I just needed a book out. I needed to see my friends holding on to a book. My first book deal had fallen through. I was absolutely heartbroken. I printed 150 copies with a sort of vanity press. I vowed to myself I would never print more than that. I just needed the object. There's so much we can talk about. We're gonna move on to another question, just because we do get into self-publishing in this book. We can talk more after if you'd like. Yes?
So what makes a great query? What makes a great query? And is there one that is the best you've ever received? What made it so great?
Well, it's hard for me to remember the best I've ever received, but I can remember some of the silliest ones I've ever received. And I have received some that appeared to be written in blood. I've received some that were written, they communicated to me in the style of the character from the novel, not in the style of the author. And one, I received a long correspondence written by a zombie who wrote over several weeks and kept sending, and this was paper letters, it wasn't emails, again and again and again. And I became intrigued by this, so they finally just unsolicited sent the manuscript, and unfortunately I didn't read it, but I took a quick look through and I wrote them back pretending I was one of the other characters in the novel and said it just wouldn't work out. So I think that basically they should have several components to them, and the big barrier you have if you're sending material unsolicited to agents is showing them that you're serious, because a lot of people just do this and they dictate the novel to Siri and print it out. And so a lot of the letters we get they don't make any sense, they're full of grammatical mistakes, spelling mistakes, and then we get a lot of them where the people have, it's their first time doing this or whatever. So if you are someone who's taken classes, who's published anything, who has any indicia you can give to show that you are serious and dedicated to this and you didn't just decide to do it on New Year's Day, that is very, very helpful. It's also a very good idea to read jacket copy and flap copy for books, because when you sum up your book, you want to have the summary be like the 2 or 3 paragraphs on the back of a paperback. That's appealing to readers. So that's a very good way to do it. It is a very arbitrary thing to read a 1-page piece of paper and be able to judge the whole book. And so you also have to accept that the editors, the agents, or whoever the gatekeepers are going to get it wrong a lot of the time, because it's rather like looking at one of the buttons on a shirt and making a decision about the whole shirt. So that is unfortunate, but it's how it is.
And don't be self-deprecating. I think I work with people on their query letters, and there's just paragraphs and paragraphs of self-deprecation. You have to strike the right tone, balance between confidence and hubris. Let's see, way in the back, in the black. I think I can't tell.
Yeah, that's a related question. I'm in the process of submitting my first manuscript to agents, and I'm wondering if you have any guidance about following up, both to the initial query and then possibly to people that don't respond to your initial query. Thank you.
So I would sort of look at it, it's as frustrating and ridiculous a process as applying for jobs. So just like when you apply for jobs, a lot of people never write you back. Well, they're lost, so you might get a bit of that. And then unfortunately, when you apply for jobs, you have to follow the procedure at each one of these different companies, even though you have only a 1 in 200 chance of them interviewing you. So it's sort of the same thing. So I would look at the website or whatever the information you have on that agency and try to follow that. There's a big variety of agents, so I do think that most agents who are out there looking for fiction are reading your query letters. Now, you can have a bad day. You can also get kind of desperate when you don't have any material and request way too many things. Like sometimes I'm like, oh my goodness, I was having a bit of a gray day that day because I've got like 8 manuscripts in and I wasn't really being very choosy. So people can be quirky and moody, but they really are looking. Now, of course, there are going to be some other agents who aren't. But I think most of the ones you contact probably will be. I get a huge number of queries on our agency website. It specifies what I'm looking for. More than 50% of the queries I get are for books in completely different subject matters or styles, where, like children's picture books, which I don't represent. So please know that most people are just putting no effort into it. They're flying these letters off everywhere. And, some people say you should never try to follow up. Sometimes it's effective as long as you're just very polite and say...
Would you say 6 weeks is appropriate? Longer? Less time?
Well, I'm a bit naughty because I put on our website, people get an automatic message, and it says if Esmond never replies to your query, that means he's not requesting your manuscript. And I just have to do it to deal with my sanity, because I feel when I get a full manuscript, I need to write someone a serious letter and say, I really like this, but this was my problem with it. So I just can't then do that for queries as well. But I think if you wait a couple of months,
Yeah.
I would say 3 months.
Yeah.
And with small publishers, by the way, well, 2 things about agents. First of all, we get rejection all the time, and we don't like it either. And we don't like it when editors kind of give you a look like, why on earth did you send me this novel? And it's actually the novel I love, and it's my favorite thing of the whole year. So we get a bit of that too. And then with small publishers, and even big publishers sometimes, the biggest publishers sometimes are so wacky that in the old days when they sent letters by mail, I got in rejection letters after the book had been published. And I had to bite my tongue and say, oh, by the way, thank you for sending me a rejection letter 18 months after I sent you the manuscript, and here's a copy of the book. And then with small publishers, they can take forever and ever and ever. But I did have one very well-known, reputable, really good, prestigious, medium-sized publisher call me and say, hey, remember that novel you sent us 18 months ago? Well, we've just had something fall through in our schedule for March, and we want to buy it right now. I almost fell out of my chair. So
That can happen. I have a story, an anecdote in before and after the book deal about the author Mitchell S. Jackson, who's a publisher. After rejecting his manuscript, it turned out the editor couldn't stop thinking about it, and they came back to him a number of months later and said, I think I made a mistake. So I mean, from the writer's point of view, if you really need a response, and I get that as a Virgo type A, closure is important. So I think, 3 months. If you can't stand it, 2 months. Let's take another question. Yes, in the white cream.
Do you think there are any advantages to trying to target, trying to target new untested agents who may be a little hungrier, but at the same time less connected with publishers?
I mean, again, I think it sort of touches on what we were saying in the beginning. It would behoove you to have a good idea of what you're hoping for from your career, if you're able to think that far. If it's really about just selling this one book, you might have to have a little bit of a longer conversation, or maybe a coffee if you live in the same city with a younger agent who perhaps has no sales record. How are they? What's their plan of attack? If they've never sold anything, where are the contacts coming from? But sometimes you might not have a choice, So if you have a good feeling with a young agent, everyone's got to start somewhere, right? So again, if you have a good feeling, they really get you, and they have a strong sense of how they can market your book, which I think is what's really important, I'd say go for it. What would everyone
I just
else?
wouldn't give them a lifetime. You set a time limit. I think it's a good practice. I don't know whether this is industry standard or whatever, but you give them 6 months, and you say, you have my book for 6 months, and if you don't make progress on it, then you're not my agent anymore. I think that's a fair thing to do. A lot of times when you're a struggling writer and you don't have any power, so they're going to try and say, okay, I get it for 2 years or something like that, and that's just not a good idea for anybody, I don't think. The other thing I want to say is you should embrace the rejection. Mm-hmm. There's something very romantic about the rejection. I enjoyed the rejection. Everyone I have ever worked with, I have a rejection letter from back when I was a struggling writer. And when I first met my new agent, I said, here's when you rejected me. I was even rejected by a janitor at a publishing house because I sent a manuscript to an editor that was no longer working there, and it was thrown in the trash, and someone took it out of the trash and then sent me a rejection letter, which seemed unnecessary. Rejection is part of the game. You're going to get rejection after rejection after rejection. It's a badge of honor when you finally climb that wall. And I have to say, when I was a struggling writer, I looked at editors and agents as the enemy, and I was going to climb that wall, and they were trying to shoot me off that wall. And eventually, you get one. And then they become your advocate until things aren't working out, and then they shoot you off that wall again, and then you got to climb back up and get another one to be your advocate. So the rejection is always going to be there. It's going to be a part of your life, no matter how many bestsellers you've had, and no matter how huge a contract you get. Eventually, you'll get that rejection again. So learn to love it.
There's different gradations of rejection. I mean, something that I think is really valuable, and another argument for making real-life contacts within the publishing industry. Social media, again, is super great, especially if you're resource-strapped or live in a rural area. Social media has a lot of pros in terms of networking, but can rarely be beat by going out to industry events, using the marketplaces, different conferences, parties, and readings, because a wonderful thing starts to happen when you meet the people behind the masthead of the magazines and journals that you're submitting to. They feel guilty when they know you. So instead of just sending you that form submission letter that gives you absolutely nothing to go on, you get a line or two of feedback simply because they know you. You've had a conversation. And for me, that's what you want to aim for when you're beginning your career is how can I get good enough that I get some feedback from my rejection letters? That helps me early on. I spent a lot of time trying to write like Raymond Carver in my 20s because that's what I saw published. That's what I thought I had to sound like. I was all alone in my log cabin. There was no one to tell me differently except for the people that were rejecting me. But it wasn't until I started going to these parties and whatnot and meeting people where they would write and say, like, I don't know, I met you, this doesn't sound like your voice, you know, and these were, it was like, you know, that game that they make you play that's a bit odd where you're blindfolded by your peers in like middle school and they lead you around. It was a little bit like that, where the rejection letters, when you get feedback, they start tugging you away from your own worst instincts. And you do have to embrace rejection at every single level. It keeps coming for you. Have a massive section on rejection post-success in here. You can't fathom it, but I have a good friend who debuted New York Times bestseller. I think she was number 4. And she admitted to me, the minute I got that news, elation, and then my second thought was, when will I fall off the list? You know, and these targets, they keep moving. And ultimately, I really do believe that the joy has to come from getting it right on the page. And if that's not where the joy is coming from, this career is going to be a difficult one for you. It's difficult anyway, but...
you should be sending out so much. I mean, again, do your homework. Don't just be sending stuff to people that wouldn't, an agent that's not going to take a children's publishing paperback book. But you should be sending out so much and getting used to those rejections. And the more you get rejected, the less personal they become. So after a while, you're just like, oh, okay, I didn't get that. But it just doesn't matter. It begins to not matter. And it kind of turns you more into a professionally minded writer.
It's just like dating.
Yes, actually. I think I did the same thing with dating. And then with new agents, too, some of those new agents are with bigger houses, so they can get help from those bigger houses. Yeah. Esmond's agency in particular, all the agents kind of work together. The other agents in the agency also have read my work and give him feedback and stuff. So it also depends on the house. And if they're getting help from some of those other agents that are more advanced in the field, that's going to be really good for you, because it means that they're hungry and they have the energy, but they also have help from veterans.
And a lot of those young agents, this is another positive about social media. I actually have negative feelings, but I'm being so generous tonight about social media. A lot of people in publishing, but especially the younger set, they're on social media. Look at their social media accounts. Are they reading books that you like? Are they retweeting articles that are kind of articles you're into? Because those are the articles that your agent's going to be asking you to write if your book eventually comes out. So the wonderful thing about social media today is that we can stalk people a little bit, just like you would someone that you're going to go to Pizza Pino with. You know, you can pull the trigger and not go get that slice of pizza. Same thing. If you're courting a young agent and then you go and see that they're all about the right alts or something, you know, maybe not your scene. Let's see. I think one more question. Let's see. We've neglected this area. Was there something way in the back there? Okay. Yes.
My question is, what are the pitfalls of submitting to a small publisher without an agent?
What are the pitfalls of submitting to a small publisher without an agent? In some cases, micro presses, small presses, they don't even want agented submissions. Sometimes they look down their nose on that. I mean, we'll all speak to this, but I definitely think that an agent is a good agent is they're a business partner. They're reading the contracts and understanding the contracts in a way that you're probably not equipped or educated to. And Ben can certainly speak to this. The good news about publishing right now is even if your actual advance for your book is very low, there's all different ways for content to be purchased these days. It can be turned into an Audible original, original audio content. It can be optioned for television, for the theater, for film. There's
a lot of places to sell content right now. But I would say shoot for an agent, and while you're shooting for an agent, write your next book. And then if you don't get a big agent, you can go down the list till you get to an agent who wants you. And if you don't get an agent, your next book is ready to try and get an agent. If you decide to give up on the agenting process, then shoot for a small press. And if you can't get a small press, then start to consider an ebook or something like that. But I think you should do it in that order. I really think shoot for a home run. And if you don't get the home run, try and get a single. That's how I always approached it. I wanted to sell 1 million copies, not one copy. And if I couldn't sell 1 million copies, I would sell one copy. But that was always the goal. Make your goal as big as you can make it, and just keep going for it. But I really do think you shouldn't just sit on a book. You really have to be working on your next project as soon as you finish the last one, because this is an industry where you're going to be trying to climb that wall over and over and over again. And if you have 5 books, you have a much better chance of getting there than if you have 1 book. And so that's the way I always approached it. I don't think there's anything wrong with a small press, but I will say you've just limited yourself. Unless you get struck by lightning, the odds are the way to a bestseller, which I think is everyone's goal, is a big agent to a big publisher. Second to that, it would be a smaller publisher. And then, you work your way down and your odds just go down and down and down and down. Speaking to publishing an ebook, it's incredibly hard for that to become a big success. But if you have special networks and special reasons why you could make it a success, that might be an option. But I think that's, shoot for the stars, and if you don't get there, then you end up in low orbit.
I would say on the opposite spectrum, I think that there is a validity and a time for writers to be quieter and to take things down a notch, and that is okay. It is absolutely okay to just want to have a chapbook, to just want to publish with the micro press that you spent your 20s reading, you think it's super cool, they have awesome covers. That's 100% okay, and it can be soul-fulfilling. The thing about success, when you start getting a lot of it, is it takes away your time to write. So the siren call of fame and success, it's sometimes worth thinking about what that's actually going to look like in your daily life. I have a section in here where I interviewed Tony Doerr, who wrote All the Light We Cannot See, and Roxane Gay. And Roxane, I was asking her, about success. Like, how does she deal with it? And she's like, I'm not dealing with it very well. I don't even have time to find an assistant. I have so much admin and travel. Like, I can't write, and I'm friends with her editor. Her books are being turned in late and whatnot. And listen, she's happy, right, with where she's at. But writing can be quiet, it can be small, it can be personal. It should be what you need inside of your heart for it to be. And if that is selling goobers of copies and making a list, then go for it. Equip yourselves with the people who are hopefully going to help you. But if it's having a book and the first print run is 500 copies, and the people who buy those 500 copies truly love and connect with it, that's okay if that's enough. That's okay. And also, if you do start without an agent, that doesn't mean that you can't get one later, especially if you already have a publication to your name. So, in closing, what can I possibly say? Write for yourself first, and then learn how to revise yourself. That's very important. Learn how to get out of your own way. And then seek out experts. And if they're not ready to take you on as an agent or an editor, don't get all uppity. Don't say that, they're wrong. Seek out the people. The reason that I know Michelle is because I attended the Wesleyan Writers Conference as a student. And I signed up for a master class that she did that was about 90 minutes. And in those 90 minutes, she changed the way that I was approaching my writer. She got rid of the Raymond Carver in me that was not me, and truly helped me pivot in my own writing career. We spent 45 minutes together, and I paid to go to that conference. It was an amazing investment. So let's see. I'm sure a lot of people still have questions. You don't have to take my word for it, but if you go out there and just flip through the table of contents in this book, I promise you it is very exhaustive, and we get into a lot. I want to thank my co-panelists for taking time out of a very, very busy time of the year and their incredibly busy schedules. Ben could have written a novel while we were sitting here already. I want to wish Michelle and Esmond so much luck with the wonderful book that they have out on submission. And I want to wish all of you the best of luck with the things that you're currently wrangling with and your future projects as well. Come and see me outside. I have a newsletter. If you go to CourtneyMaum.com, get published, stay published. It's free. I have publishing professionals profiled, lots of advice, yada, yada. But thank yourselves for being here. You're already investing in your work, and that is important and worthy, and good luck.